Now, the relation between overdetermination and Hegelian philosophy. In thesis 6 on Feuerbach, Marx says, and I quote, "But the human essence is no abstraction inherent in each single individual. In its reality, it is the ensemble of social relations. This ensemble of social relations is elaborated by the concept method popularized by Althusser, which we have referred to already as overdetermination. The dialectic of mutually constitutive causes and effects. You see, this, say, politics is causing certain cultural effects. Politics, say the domination that Adani has today, the power, is influencing a cultural aspect. He has acquired NDTV. NDTV is now the way it functions, the way it presents news. It's totally changing. But this cultural effect will also influence politics because people will now be influenced. They will no longer see what was being shown previously in NDTV. For example, just now I was watching NDTV and there I saw recently there was some very undeniably roguish posters saying that Brahmins and Vaniyas, something like that, they should leave the campus, etc. Now, this is a mischievous kind of poster. Now, this is being presented in a particular way. I'm not going into the details of that, but you have the interviews with the authorities, then you have interviews with the BBP office bearer, then you have an interview with the. So all adds together and creates a certain truth about what is happening in JNU, which is different from the kind of truth effect that was being produced previously. So this is politics is changing culture, and people receive this, and this will become the truth about JNU. So this is how politics is affecting culture. Culture is affecting back politics. So there is cause and effect. This is what is a cause, then becomes an effect, and what is an effect then becomes cause, leading to an ever-changing universe with no linear direction of change, which Hegelian dialectics promises. It moves from higher and higher generalities. From property, you move to value. From value, you move to morality. From morality, you move to ethics. And from ethics, you move to state. So this is the Hegelian journey in the philosophy of history, philosophy of right, sorry. In Hegelian dialectic, the higher moments or generalities subsume or absorb all the lower moments, which are then determined by the higher generality. There is no further determination of the higher moments by the lower moments. It is like the development of more general linguistic categories. It's similar to that. More general linguistic categories. For example, you say flower-bearing plants. Then the antecedent would be, say, fruit-bearing plants. And then you have synthesis of fruit and flower-bearing plants. And then you have some plants which bear crops, say. And then ultimately you move to a higher generality, that is plants in general. Then all these become moments of that. There is nothing. They are nothing more than plants. So there is no further determination of higher movement that is plants by lower movements. Plant is a category which encompasses all this. This is the higher generality. This is no longer influenced by fruit, whether it bears fruit or whether it flowers or whether it bears crops or whatever. It is like the development of more general linguistic categories. History progresses through the unfolding of spirit or absolute reason. At each stage, it develops through the triadic logic. For example, spirit expressed in many individual individual beings, individually perceived freedom of will. That is how that's how we had started the discussion of philosophy of right. That is, spirit is expressed in many individuals in existence as freedom of will. This is contradicted or negated by pure externality. We have said this. This is sublimated or synthesized. This is contained completely in the incomplete one. There are many individuals. This is now sublimated into one. What is that? The universal. What is that universal? That is property. So these are contained in property. Will an external world become particulars of the universal property? They have no identity other than that defined in property. In this sense, the lower moments, will and externality, being transformed into just particulars of property, cannot impact the idea of property. You see, once will and externality have been joined together in the higher generality of property, they no longer can in any way impact property itself. This is the Hegelian logic. In the logic of overdetermination, there is always mutual determination. Overdetermination implies both the mutual determination of different levels of generalities. For example, property is a generality, which is a higher generality than will and externality. Limits of property are circumscribed by will. So, though Hegelian logic proposes that will or external world cannot, externality cannot impact the idea of property, which is the universal, limited though, but still it is the universal. It is the one which will now make all these many wills their moments. But in fact, overdetermination will say that the limits of property are themselves affected by general will. That is, for example, there are conflicts over commons, which were subsumed in property. So, I put my will and make the external world my property. You put your will and make some external world your property. But then there is this overlooks the fact which overdetermination allows that there is conflict. Well, why does it have to be private property? There can be commons. Everyone has rights over this. Conflict over commons which was subsumed in property in the Hegelian logic. Also circumscribed by the emergence of new inputs, say digitized data. You see, we say that the property is totally now external world and will cannot impact property, but overdetermination allows this, and we see that that is more realistic. For example, when digitized data emerged, the idea of property itself had to be changed. New laws had to be, new rules had to be determined, have to be imposed for determining property rights, and still it is going on because there is digitized data is not well protected. We still have a lot of piracy, as also between different processes. So this is one way in which overdetermination works between different levels of generalities, and also it works between the different processes, economic, political, cultural, natural, etc. We discussed an example of this. Overdetermination also questions the very idea of a category, linguistic, theoretical, whatever. It questions the categorical, that is, analytical categories. In this sense, there is an affinity, a commonality to post. Overdetermination also questions the categorical, that is, analytical categories. In this sense, there is an affinity, a commonality to postmodern thought. You see, postmodernism says that, well, we use categories for thinking, for voicing our thoughts, etc. But actually, what we are trying to limit within words, within linguistic categories, say, is something beyond language. There are a lot of things that we try to put into language, but we fail to do so. And that is, postmodernism says that we categories, analytical divisions, these are not sufficient for expressing. And in fact, if you look at any text, you will find that it goes beyond the categories. It goes beyond what itself professes as the logic. They, in fact, go into detail Hegel's texts also and show that, well, it is not as logical as it was. So overdetermination also questions the categorical. Categories or generalizations are important for understanding, for analysis, and for communication. But an element or an event is never identical to its category. Say we use a qualifier. This is the, and we think that that is sufficient. Is. I say so and so is, Sadein is a student. Now, a student is not defined by the qualifier student alone. An individual student is determined by a host of personally specific histories. These individual students' attributes then contribute to redefining the category of student, to subcategorize it in that social historical situation. For example, the ongoing struggles in different universities, you find the caste struggles, the tribe struggles, etc., etc., women's struggles. Now, these are then you say that a person is a student. What is this is? As if that is sufficient to categorize, but then you supplement it. You add and add and add. So categories and generalizations are important for understanding, but one should understand that an element or an event is never identical. It is never the category itself. This is what overdetermination allows, but dialectics of essentialism does not allow. While the general or universal characteristics, while the general or universal characteristics of an entity, say student, may be logically proposed at the starting point of a discourse, the concrete specifications of any entity, for example, a student, are determined by their concrete character. That is what we can sense, maybe inarticulate. You see, without the categories, language, the words we use, this is a cultural construct. It constrains our thought. It allows certain things to be thought. It does not allow certain things to be thought. The dictionary, the lexicon, and the grammar. So, but it is also necessary. While the general or universal characteristics of an entity, say a student, may be logically posed at the starting point of a discourse, we can say that this is a student. The concrete specifications of an entity are determined by their concrete character. What we can sense may be inarticulate. So, beyond the linguistic categories, beyond the analytical categories, we can sense that, well, there are things on earth which are not expressed in the words that are spoken. So we can try to sense that, maybe inarticulate. We cannot articulate it because we lack the words for them. It is only recently, for example, that we are admitting that yes, there is a lot of casteism within the student community, the discrimination on religion or caste basis by the teachers, by the students, etc. So these, we were previously what happened, people were feeling, sensing that, well, all is not fine. But now you are being able to articulate. So what initially we sense inarticulately. Overdetermination allows discursive space for excess qualifiers. That is something beyond the student. You say, Sadin is a student, but no, Sadin is not just a student. Then what is he? Well, he hails from Bihar. And so these excess things, and these are, of course, I'm using words because you cannot think, I cannot articulate beyond words. Concreteness is perceived, not conceived. You see, concrete, that is the specifics of a person. Sadain is a specific person. I can perceive his differences from others. I can perceive his difference from the person who was conducting in the previous lectures, from deep prosing. But I cannot really capture what is this difference. I cannot categorize these differences. When we try to comprehend the concrete character of an entity, what makes this entity different from others, that is, when we try to comprehend the concrete character of an entity, it is in terms of categories, normally linguistic. I'm saying that, well, Dipro is a Bengali, Southern is a Bihari. I'm sticking within language, but categories, classes of entities are all generalities violating concreteness. I'm still not being able to get to what Southern is. It is the classic case of what the postmoderns call the attempt to reach in language beyond language. But this is an exercise which overdetermination allows, that at least we can conceive that there is something beyond these logical statements that we are making. This relates to the notion of practice that Marx emphasized in the thesis on Feuerbach's. It is a process that is constantly constructing the links between the unique or concrete, that is the experience, and the categorical. Our thought is categorical, and what is our experience, the external world, that we are perceiving it, and our thought is now impinging with that through practice, and through practice we are again enriching our thoughts. So there is a continuous churning. It is the never-ending practice. This is what the thesis on Feuerbach says. Marx's thesis on Feuerbach says. This confounds the philosopher's desire to instill order or linearity into the flow of history. The ensemble of social relations is the concrete social condition of the individual that is not produced in thought as categorical. This is a concrete social condition of the individual. It is not produced as categorical. You say ensemble. Now these are all pulling and pushing in all directions. We cannot contain it in some logical, triadic synthesis. Thus, human essence is no Hegelian essence. In fact, there is no essence, human or otherwise, as we had argued in our previous lecture. At every historical moment, the so-called human essence is the product of the overdetermined totality called society, ridden with divisions. There are class divisions, there are linguistic divisions, there are religious divisions, etc. So it is the product of the overdetermined totality called society, ridden with divisions, defying the idea of a single essence. This questions whether there is at all any human essence. Now, we'll go. This is a poster which was put up in a factory and which was published in a net scene called Workers Connect in September 2007. Now, I find this a very instructive poster which shows in overdetermination in a very concrete way. Now, is the cursor visible? Is the cursor visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It is visible. It is visible.
Yes?
Yes, sir.
Achha. Now, so you have this, anything is possible when you work as a team. You see, as showing the ants carrying a weight which is much beyond their own. Anything is possible when you work as a team. So what does this tell you? More productivity is possible if we can get the workers to work together, not as individuals, feel belonging to a community. So you see, we had said that there is alienation. We'll discuss this in greater detail when we come to capitalism. The worker feels alienated from his work and from his community, feels a sense of loss. So then you say that, well, you're working in a team, this is your community. So you can get the workers to work together and not as individuals, feels belonging to a community. Capital is using workers' need for community. So this is a cultural thing they are using to get more out of them. So culture is working with economy. Now, you look at teamwork means never having to take all the blame yourself. See, again, this is trying to mislead the worker, that never having to take the blame yourself. So teamwork. So then who will take the blame? The blame will be taken by the team of workers. So there is no blame being attached to the capitalist, no blame being attached to the manager. All the blame will be taken by the workers. But of course, then the worker doesn't see this. The culture, the propaganda is that you individually will not be blamed for this. Then then there is together everyone achieves more. You see, and the happiness on the faces, everyone is working together, you achieve more. So this is simply getting the workers to work together as a team and hence to get higher profits. There is competition between the teams. That is what all corporate entities do, encouraging competition between teams doing the same kind of work. This breaks up trade union unity. So you are always, are you a good team member? You're not asked, are you a good trade union member? So there are no trade unions. You work, your team is all, and you're happy with the team. Look at the expression of joy on their faces. So this is again a cultural motive which is being used to it is being ingeniously used to beguile the workers to produce more. This is an example of how cultural and political processes they overdetermine the economic process and make, for example, trade unions redundant. Now, beyond that, if you look at the general economic phenomena, overdetermination is a scheme which allows us a better understanding of economic phenomena. Overdetermined implies necessary presence of contradictions or pulls and pushes within any process, forcing continuous change. We have discussed this. There is no essential determination, hence, there is no logical outcome of a process which can be theoretically deduced. For example, you take the question of price determination. Now, economic determinism says the standard mainstream economics. What does it say? Price is determined by demand-supply equilibrium, and that is that. You can have a more complicated model, a general equilibrium model. You can feed it into computers and generate simulation models, etc., etc. But it is purely determined by the logic of demand and supply, and that is the end of the story. Now, when you consider the scheme of overdetermination, there are political processes, say public or lobby pressures, which determine and redetermine prices of important constituents of cost, say diesel. So you have prices which are controlled by the government. Now, how are they determined? They're determined by pressures. They are determined by the political necessity of maintaining popularity. They are determined by lobby pressures, etc., etc. So there are political processes which are going to the determination of prices. Now, similarly, wage determination itself is not a demand-supply thing. It's a cultural and political process. You see, whether the trade unions will have the strength to bargain with monopoly capital, it depends on a certain atmosphere, which includes both the people and the state. When you have a very conservative kind of an atmosphere, as we have today in most places, trade unions they are not in favor even with the workers. The workers, in spite of the fact that you find that economic condition is deteriorating, their workers are committed to very conservative ways of political being. So now that is an important thing. How strong is your trade union consciousness? So wage determination is not a demand-supply logic. So there is a flexibility, and it keeps changing depending on the total political atmosphere. So economic determinism doesn't allow you to understand price determination in all its aspects. Similarly, you consider macro processes. For example, LPG. This is a term which in economics we use in a bit of a derogatory fashion. That is liberalization, privatization, and globalization. That is basically what the kind of policies which are being promoted in India from around 1985 and formally from 1991, which we call the new economic policy, liberalization. Now, if you have faith in economic determinism, you will say that why was LPG done? Well, it was done for economic efficiency of achieving targets. See, the public sector is less efficient, so you do away with it. So you have privatization. You have liberalization, because what will liberalization do? First of all, it will allow capital to come in with its own in modern technology also, those production processes which are inefficient, they will die out, and you will have more efficient commodities being imported from abroad. Uh, and globalization, of course, will allow you to export the things that are desired, that you have advantage in, and import the things which you don't have an advantage in. So this is, it's all efficient. Economic efficiency is determining this LPG. Now, overdetermination will say that, well, there are various other aspects, reasons why LPG is adopted. For example, there is domestic pressure of capital unable to expand on the basis of domestic market given the commodity bias. There some large capitalists are producing some commodities which don't have a large domestic market, so they are inclined to go in for liberalization. Uh, now, then we had the IMF and World Bank pressures. The government was not being able to mobilize the resources for its working, and so it had to take loans, and these loans brought certain conditionalities which were imposed by the IMF, and this was a reason why we adopted LPG, not for reasons of efficiency. Now, what is the outcome of this? You see, outcome of this, we all, I'm not saying that all would agree with this, but generally the result, as you can see before your eyes, is jobless growth. Whether you look at the academics, you find in academia, you have only contractual work jobs going. And similarly, you have even big companies like Facebook, like Google, they're all laying off. So you have a jobless growth. So political process accommodating the informal sector. Now when you have this jobless growth, what happens? The government faces pressure because people are losing jobs. Then what are they doing? Where are these people? See, you have to eke out your living, so you go to the informal sector. Now, when you go to the informal sector works on the basis, on certain basis which is not formal or legal. For example, a person has lost his or her job, now sets up a stall which is selling tea on the roadside. So you're violating, you're not taking any permission. The corporation will not give you permission to set up a stall. You have become a hawker. You have the hawker's market. So it has to accommodate. So what the government does is to allow informally these this informal sector to exist. So you are, so the entire process is not a question of just economic efficiency, doing this for economic efficiency, and the result is neither efficiency. The result is a hodgepodge of political accommodation, jobless growth, etc. And also, you find that when the election draws near, the ruling party will be slowly drawing back from its policy of liberalization. So all this impacts the economic process. So there is a continuous churning, which overdetermination allows one to capture, which economic determinism doesn't. From the standpoint of overdetermination, there poses two kinds of problems. There is indeterminacy and ceaseless change. Ceaseless change, analysis is always incomplete because whenever you say that, well, this is the politics, this is the culture, and so this should be the outcome. By the time you decide on this, the politics has changed. Say the election has neared, or some extraneous factors influence politics. So analysis is always incomplete. When you have reached a conclusion, you find that the conclusion has to be changed. Looked at from the perspective of overdetermination, theoretical analysis is part of the overdetermined totality called society. So all theories produce partial analysis and have political intent. So the theories, they are never complete on the one hand, and the other is that, of course, the theories themselves are part of the entirety of the social reality because these theories try to influence. You see, when I am talking of liberalization, privatization, and globalization, I am trying to influence your thought, your ideas about this in a particular way, which is not conservative. You see, so all theories have their political intent, and theories are always result in partial analysis, it's never complete. So all determines all. That is what we call overdetermination. So then a fundamental question comes that if all determines all, where do we start from? What is the entry point? You see, in the case of determinism, of essentialism, there is no argument. Where do I enter from? Say in mainstream economics, the entry point is very simple. Homo economicus, the individual who maximizes own utility. Or if you take dialectical materialism, it's very simple. Where do you enter from? You start from the forces of production, uh, which is the motor of history. So the entry point, there is no problem if you are using an essentialist framework of analysis. But if you're using a non-essentialist framework like overdetermination, then you have a problem where to enter from, and that is the point of our next lecture, which we will start today. Of course, we will not be able to complete this. That is, what is the entry point of overdetermined Marxism? It is class. Now, the entry point logic of overdetermination leaves the entry point into analysis open. Unlike essentialism, you have either Homo economicus or you have the force of production. But the logic of overdetermination leaves the entry point into analysis open. Marx's entry point, that is class, is his political choice. His association with the working class movements privilege the question of exploitation and hence of class. So you see, class is not, it's not as if previously one used to subscribe to this idea that, well, Marxism is science, so that is, class is a scientific point of entry. That is the truth. No, you can enter into analysis using the Homo economicus, you can enter into analysis using class. What entry point you choose depends on your political position, and Marx's political position was determined by his involvement with the working class movements. His ultimate goal is human emancipation. We'll talk about this in great detail later, which consists of the elimination of all oppression and exploitation, of which he gives great importance to ending economic exploitation, that is, to economic emancipation. Marx, of course, does not use the term economic emancipation, but we can talk of this economic emancipation. He gave great importance to economic exploitation, so he wanted to end that. So he wanted economic emancipation, but as we will see, this was not the end of the story. Marx, his ultimate goal was human emancipation, emancipation from all oppression and exploitation. Now, of course, Marx was not aware of every kind of oppression, and see that he himself in places, he is not only is he not aware of gender oppression, but he appears to be quite sexist in ways. So that is the result of his time. So there is a tendency to make Marx a god. That is not so. He was a product of his times. And he could see this oppression and that oppression, but he couldn't see those oppressions. But he stated his ultimate goal is human emancipation, which concerns elimination of all exploitation. And he laid particular emphasis on economic emancipation, that is, ending of economic exploitation. Why? Because of his association with the working class movement, which led him to understand that this is what the poorest of the poor are really concerned about. We will discuss the role he assigns to political emancipation, or what does he mean by political emancipation? The abolition of discrimination by state based on identities, among which he stresses religious identity. Now, this is something which we will again have to fight for in the coming days. We are now in a position where we have a state which is discriminating on the basis of religion. So, and you see, this is history repeating itself. When Marx was writing, there were states which were discriminating on the basis of religion. Particularly, he's talking of a European experience. discriminated against were the Jews. So he was talking of political emancipation, that is, abolition of discrimination by state, which was based on religion. Generally, we can say that political emancipation means the abolition of discrimination by the state based on identities, among which religion is one identity. There could be linguistic identities, there could be caste identities in our country, etc. We will also discuss the limitations of economic emancipation. We will use a particular definition of class as a process of surplus extraction. There can be other definitions of class, of course. Using this approach, we differentiate between fundamental and subsumed classes. These are words, of course, which are terms which are, of course, used by Marx and popularized by two people called Resnick and Wolff. The references are there. Of course, did you? I skipped over the reference of the previous part. Did I? Let me see this. Also, the previous part of this lecture, the references are here. Althusser Contradiction and Overdetermination in his book For Marx. Then there's Mao Zedong on Contradiction in Selected Works. And there is Hegel's Philosophy of History. These are three works that we have used for this part of the lecture. Now, coming back to our question of classes, we will also elaborate how countries or economies are classified as capitalist, feudal, etc. Now, class as entry. Overdetermination is the mode of being of natural and social processes. What does this mean, overdetermination? We have seen this. There is no logical center, there is no essence. So there is no logical starting point of analysis either. So choice of entry point is voluntary, and in that sense it is political. It is not essential or logical. It is not philosophy. It is not epistemology. It is not logic which is telling you that you have to start from here. That is how essentialists argue that this is the starting point. The classical economists would argue that Homo economicus is the starting point, and so would mainstream economics today. But an overdetermined approach says that no, there is no logical starting point. The choice is a political choice. Marx's philosophy, consequently, his entry point into socio-economic analysis, was determined by his association with the working class movements. In his theoretical analysis, Marx privileged class as entry point. This was because of his principal concern was exploitation, which distinguished him from other socialists. See, as we had mentioned in a previous lecture, that Marx did not fall from the skies. He carried certain traditions with him. One was the socialist tradition. You have Fourier, and so on. And he was also part of the political economic tradition. So he was concerned with exploitation, which distinguished him from other socialists. The other socialists were concerned with redistribution. They were concerned with making small communities of people who own property in common, etc. But he delved deep into it and into the production process, and discovered that the reason for deprivation was exploitation. Some people producing surplus, some other people extracting the surplus. The concreteness of the working class struggles Marx participated in, reported on, and theorized about showed the hollowness of the vulgar approach of both classical political economy and the socialists who came before it. First, exploitation could not be examined in terms of the obvious unanalyzed categories of rich, poor, or propertyless. Now, if you say that, exploitation is rich exploiting poor, so you just redistribute, give something to the poor. Propertyless. Now, of course, being propertyless is a condition for exploitation within the capitalist economy. Now, but the reason why being propertyless allows you to be exploited is not just that because you're propertyless. It is because you're selling your labor power. This is something which the socialists did not understand. Exploitation could not be examined in terms of obvious, unanalyzed general categories. Secondly, following from the first, redistributive policies were bound to be ineffective. Socialism had to undo the exploitative relations rooted in production. Socialist programs of redistributions have been criticized by Marx at various places, including the early economic and philosophical manuscripts. Now, and I quote, an enforced rise in wage, that is a redistributive policy, an enforced rise in wages, disregarding all other difficulties, including the fact that such an anomalous situation could only be prolonged by force. An anomalous situation means that you try to push up wages below what the market would allow. You try to push it up. Now, you can do this. It can be sustained, but if you have the force of trade unions, which are more than the force of the capitalists, of course, this would be anachronism, because how could you have, if the trade unions are more powerful than the capitalists, then the system would fall. So, disregarding all of the difficulties, including the fact that such an anomalous situation could only be prolonged by force, would therefore be nothing more than better pay for slaves, and would not mean an increase in human significance or dignity for either the worker or the labor. So you increase wages. Suppose this could be done. Then he's saying what? In that case, what would it be? It would be nothing better than better pay for slaves. Now, why is he saying slaves? We'll see this as we move on. Because once you have sold your labor power, that is what the workers are doing. Those who are dispossessed of all productive property other than the inalienable right to work. You see, the right to work cannot be taken away from you, because if you the power to work, if it is taken away, then life is taken away from you. So one has lost everything else. We have discussed this process, how they were deprived, gradual process of loss from the independent petty artisans to the dependent petty artisans to the workers in the manufactory, and that was the formal subsumption under capital. Then to the factory, the change in technology, the change in organization, where you become, now you are really subsumed under capital. So then you become a slave. You are no longer, you lose all your interest in your work. You're alienated from your work. So you become a slave in the sense that you carry out the orders of the managers, who are the representatives of the capitalists, or the capitalists themselves doubling up as the managers. So if you are given better pay, what would it mean? Better pay for slaves, one who is enslaved, forced to do work in a particular way, would not mean an increase in human significance or dignity for either the worker or the labor, either the worker who has entered the factory or his labor. The labor is taken away from the worker, yet the worker has sold the labor power. Further on, he says, this is criticizing the socialists who are thinking that if you increase wages, then that is the end of the story. Everything is fine, and there is no poverty. Further on, he says, and I quote, wages are an immediate consequence of estranged labor, and estranged labor is the immediate cause of private property. If the one falls, then the other must fall too. That is, if estranged labor falls, then private property will also fall. The goal of revolutionary socialism is the abolition of estrangement of worker from his labor and its product, and consequently from humanity. You see, why is the worker estranged from his labor? Because the worker has lost all the right to the means of production, complementary means of production. He owns no machines. He cannot buy the raw materials. And so the worker is forced to sell the only thing that he possesses in order to earn money to sustain himself. So sells what? Sells labor power. Now, so the labor power that you sell, it is under the command of someone else, and you no longer enjoy working. You see, I have conceived of this course of lectures, no matter who listens or does not listen to it. Uh, you see, I had great joy in planning this. This is quite unlike when I was teaching in the universities. Of course, teachers always try to take an interest in their own teaching, because otherwise you fail your students. But still, you're always constrained by the syllabus, which is constrained by what the UGC requires, etc., etc. So now, but now I am totally unconscious. So I have pleasure in what I am teaching. So once the laborer is forced to work for the sells the labor power now becomes a private property of someone else. So exchange labor is the immediate cause of private property. Is the immediate cause of, is not just the result of private property, it is also the cause of private property. Why? Because it is through this labor power which the capitalist is appropriating, getting the surplus value, and then converting it into more capital. So it is the immediate cause of private property. If the one falls, exchange labor, then the other must fall too. And this is the goal of revolutionary socialism. The significance of class can be read from Marx's discussion on the various kinds of emancipations on the Jewish question. He talks of political and human emancipation and assigns the greatest value to human emancipation. That is, as we have said, emancipation from all oppressions and exploitations. Though he does not denigrate political emancipation, he does not reduce its importance, or the establishment of a secular democratic state. And I quote, political emancipation is, of course, a big step forward. True, it is not the final form of human emancipation in general, but it is the final form of human emancipation within the hitherto existing world order. Now, within the hitherto existing world order, that is the world order where there is class division. Within this is the best that you can get. That is, the state doesn't discriminate. You have a constitution which doesn't mention anyone by name. Unlike what we are slowly tending towards, a constitution which will discriminate between religions. You have the CIA, NRC, etc. It goes without saying that we are speaking here of real practical emancipation. True, it is not the final form of human emancipation. So, this real practical emancipation is the human emancipation. Close quote. Hitherto existing world order is referring to the class divided world order. By human emancipation, Marx means the end of all alienation, of which economic alienation rooted in the relations of production was the gravest, according to him. This agenda was based on his political motivation derived from his involvement with the working class movements. You see, it is not just as Lenin said in the three sources and three component parts of Marxism. It is not from the intellectual sources, from classical political economy, from French socialism and German philosophy, but it is derived essentially from his working class, his association with the working class movement, which really fixed his focus on class as the point of entry into his analysis. Thus, the significance of class as an analytical category for the project of liberating human beings in the Marxian scheme. So, the Marxist political agenda leads to the analytic entry point of class. Now, what is class? Class is the relation between men formed in the process of performing exchange labor or surplus labor. The exploited class or classes performing surplus labor for the exploiting class or classes. This is what is the class relation. And I quote, the relationship of man to himself becomes objective and real for him only through his relationship to another man. It is if therefore he regards the product of his labor, his objectified labor, as an alien, hostile and powerful object which is independent of him, then his relationship to that object is such that another man, alien, hostile, powerful and independent of him, is his master. So this is the class relation, the master and the servant. If he relates to his own activity as unfree activity, then he relates to it as activity in the service under the rule, coercion, and yoke of another. Now, this is a large quote from the Economic and Philosophy
Pranab,
Manuscript.
what is there on your screen? Is it the reference only? In here we can see only the reference. So I thought that with the reference you
You
didn't
can't
change the
see?
slide. No, we thought that after the referential slide you didn't change the slide.
Now, can it be seen?
Yeah, yes sir, yes sir.
Uh, I think I've gone too far. I will not proceed any further. I guess briefly, these are the first. Uh, can you see the scope of module?
Yes sir.
Now, this is the first screen slide that I was talking about. This discusses what we will be discussing today, as I mentioned, logic of entry point, overdetermination, and the entry point to analysis, and why Marx used the entry point of class. Then, what was his ultimate goal? That it was human emancipation, but he laid a lot of stress on economic emancipation. Why? Because of his association with the working class movements. We will also discuss the question of political emancipation. What is that? We have discussed. That is the state not discriminating on the basis of particular identities, religious, linguistic, cultural, etc. Now, we will also discuss the limits of economic emancipation, that is, the ending of class exploitation. What are the limits of this? Is it sufficient? Does economic end of class exploitation, does it mean human emancipation? We will discuss this. We will use a particular definition of class as a process of surplus extraction, and then we will see how this leads to the difference between fundamental and subsumed classes. We will elaborate how countries or economies, why countries or economies are classified as capitalist and feudal. This was what was is the scope of this module. Then we are talking about why class is an entry point. Overdetermination, of course, means that there is no particular logical entry point, unlike essentialism. So Marx used the entry point of class because of his commitment to workers' movements, because of his experience with the workers' movements. Now, uh, this was quite in difference from both classical political economy and socialists. Socialists who came before him thought that redistributive policies were the best policies. Marx criticizes them and says that one has to understand that exploitation, class exploitation, is the basis, is the source of all this poverty. This and then Marx discusses why redistributive policies are ineffective. Increase in wages will still keep estranged labor undignified. Then he talks of political and human emancipation, and he says that political emancipation is not without its worth, but it is useful only within the existing world order, that is, within the class divided society. Political emancipation, that is, the emancipation where the state does not discriminate on the basis of any identity, religious, linguistic, caste, or whatever. This is desirable. This is the last kind of emancipation that you can have within a class divided society. But this is not human emancipation. So this is what we discussed. I think we'll end here because of this problem. Otherwise, maybe we could proceed a bit more. So if there are any questions, we will take them.
Pranab, can I ask you one question?
Yes.
Yes. So thing is that you're talking about that class is the entry point for Marx, and this is coming up in that in a situation where the mode of production is overdetermined but essentialized, right? Because otherwise you can't start with class. Okay. And if when you're talking about that socio-political system is overdetermined, and that is basically essentialized or non-essentialized. In a given socio-political system which is over-determined and complex and where the workers are working.
Well, if you're talking about the socio-economic system, like when we say that, say, America is capitalist, say, now that is something which we'll discuss, that why, in what sense we say that a country can be characterized by this analytical category, capitalism. That is a different thing. We have not discussed that. But of course, when we say capitalist, we are using a theoretical category, no doubt. But as we mentioned, as particularly when we are discussing this thesis on Feuerbach also, that it is continuous. When you have overdetermination, there is no end. You see, analytically, the analysis never ends. You cut off, you take a cross section and make a statement. But this statement is not the end of the process. It keeps on changing. Like, for example, we could say that we were, once upon a time, we were a democratic, secular democratic state, which would in a large way, correspond to what Marx was saying, a politically emancipated state, whereas he was referring to the states within the American Union of States. But now, that was at one point of time. And then the churning has been going on. There's been no revolutionary change. But because of this churning now, it is difficult for us to say very definitely that we belong to a society which is politically emancipated. Our tendency towards is away from the political emancipation. So, in that sense, of course we will use categories. We have to use categories, but it's the typical postmodern conundrum of thinking and articulating beyond language, thinking in language and beyond language, talking in language beyond language. That problem is there. Though we, of course, try to, when we say capitalism, we do mean something. When we say capitalist economy, we do mean something. But there is a continuous churning, which is more evident in a country like India, where you have a significant capitalist sector, but you also have a significant non-capitalist sector, and you still say it is basically a capitalist country, because most of the non-capitalist sector is also dominated by, in some sense, they are related to and pandering to the capitalist sector. But beyond that, you do have another sector, and the state takes different policies, it uses different instruments to control the people working within these sectors, as it has been discussed in great detail. We'll refer to this a bit by Partha Chatterjee and others who talk of political society and civil society.
Right. And one more thing is that when you talk about the trade union, as a ways in enhancing instrument or agency, which is basically leading to a kind of trade union consciousness generally for the worker. Now, Marx is actually critical of this because that is not leading to anywhere, because exchange labor is still there, and that is basically alienating for the workers. Now, how it is, but all left politics or whatever, they start with trade unionism, and trade union becomes an important agency to organize workers. Now, what is the modus operandi to shift this trade union consciousness into the real class consciousness when the exchange labor will be free from this?
You see, I do not have the answer to this, and neither do I think anyone has a universal answer to this. Okay. Now, first of all, trade union consciousness, it was decried not so much by Marx himself, but by Lenin particularly. The trade union consciousness does not lead to socialist consciousness directly. And Lenin, in the tract that where he decried this trade union consciousness, he was very soon to write another tract saying that I did this because it was part of a polemical debate. And see, as we discussed in the context of the thesis on Feuerbach, I forget which thesis. In the next class, I will come back to your question if you are attending my next lecture. and particularly bring that thesis, which highlights the fact that you see there is the relation between theory and thought and matter, and this bridge is practice, which Marx says clearly. Now, this gives a lie to certain beliefs that trade unionism is unnecessary, or that you cannot gather any experience of socialist consciousness from trade union practice. Of course, it is not the only source, definitely, but trade union practice, involvement with activism is an important source of socialist consciousness. And he says also that the educator must be educated. There cannot be the vanguard party, the idea of the vanguard party itself is also jinxed in various ways, as the history of the countries which have undergone socialist revolution, their later history generally points to. It is the vanguard party thinks that it is the educator, but Marx says clearly in his thesis on Feuerbach that the educator himself must be educated. There cannot be this theory and practice difference. So that is not you can't have a universal answer. It must be specific to
The context.
politics and the area. For example, now you have this movement, big, rather large movement going on, which is surprising. I never thought that the movement could go on, but with Swiggy and Blinkit, etc. This is a totally different kind of sector, and unless the people who are working these trade unions, the workers and those other than the workers who are involved in this trading, they can capture the real problem with this. And you see that it is so they are not even considered as employees legal in our country. They are considered as what partners. They are considered as
Or service provider, maybe.
yes, partners. Now, whether this can be challenged in court now, all this is the result of the working in the trade unions and the consciousness of that the Swiggy and Blinkit workers themselves have gleaned from their struggle. See? So it is always the trade union consciousness is very important. I think. We know it is definitely not the only component.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Are there any other questions? If not, then
Sir, I have a question.
yes.
Sir,
Go
actually, as I introduced myself, right now I'm working on education, so I have something related to that. Like you mentioned that laborers were alienated from their work because now they were being directed by what to do, and they were not having the property rights. So something like that is currently happening in academics because now the funds are very tight, and in order to do work there is going to be industry linkage. So if suppose as a researcher I'm interested in working in something that may not be demanded in the market at present, because as a researcher we work on issues that may be important after 30-40 years, which we can see as a researcher, maybe or maybe not, but the market cannot see that, right? So if the funds are getting allocated by the industry linkage with academicians and funds are tight, so the researchers will be alienated from their own work in some sense or the other. And unlike what happened with the labor class was that the labor power is embodied within the individuals, but the output was not very much affected because the intended output were produced. But in case of academicians, if you try to do disturb their mental process, then the output will be affected. Number one. Number two is that in order to get the funds and have that industry linkage, the problem that may happen is that the academic norms and values, the epistemic norms and values of the discipline gets compromised. Suppose as a researcher, if I have to get funds, this happens in pharmaceuticals a lot.
I think I get your point. If you continue, I will lose.
Okay, sir.
Right.
So
I think
this is
every
this is the point, and it is happening actually at
no,
present. So I
no,
don't
no,
know
no,
how
no.
to go
First of
about
all,
it. Yeah.
uh, I would disagree with the statement you made in between that the worker is alienated from his labor. Okay, but this does not impact the product. Of course, it does impact the product. You see, take for example, just a recent example. You see, a cultural worker is a worker. The person working a television channel is a worker. And you see, with the change of ownership of NDTV, see a lot of people have resigned. That's a different issue. But the kind of product you see now, the people who are leaving. So what does it indicate? These people were enjoying their work, and now they anticipate that no, certain conditions, certain ways of working will be imposed on us, which are not something which we desired, which is not something for which we joined entity. So they're leaving their job. And what is the impact? The impact is a change in the product itself. You see, just a month ago, if there was a problem at JNU, there is a problem that there are some antisocial, I would say these posters are quite antisocial. It's disturbing and mischievous, I think. I don't know who has planted it. But it would have been, the thing would have been presented in a different way. So the product is also changing. You see, when the workers have control over their work, the product is one kind of a product. When the workers do not have control over their work, it happens everywhere. Uh, when you have an assembly line production, uh, the product will be different. So that there I disagree that the product doesn't change. I disagree. Now regarding the other significant point that you're making, that well, you're saying that if it is tied to industry, then uh, the quality of work, fundamental research will be affected. Now, that is, of course, true, but I think even without tying up with industry, even without tying up with industry, the very manner in which academics is being evaluated, the API, Academic Performance Index, the way in which it is being evaluated, this itself is leading to a certain degradation of the nature of academic work. People are running to publish. Now, publication, it's not that you're thinking something fundamental, you want to, you're working on it with joy, and then you think that this has to be conveyed, this is something which my students or my peers should think about, and then I publish. It's not like that. I publish because I have to publish, because I have to score points. So this was not just related to industry. Of course, I do agree with you that if it is really tied up with industry, then the nature. This will be particularly true of scientific research in science. The impact on the social sciences will be more limited. Actually, the social science will die out. You see, that is where we are. And going to this, but
Yes, sir. Sir, I have a follow-up question. When I say that the product doesn't get affected, what I exactly mean is that maybe my wordings were not.
exactly, slowly.
Yeah. So what I was meaning is that in case of any physical product, there is a production function and there is technology, and the output is fixed. Like I can replicate the same work. Say, for example, a
There's the
Samsung
production
mobile.
function. What is this production function? I don't know what the production.
Production
Production
function in the
function
sense.
is a
Just
myth.
a minute,
It
sir.
is a myth created by mainstream economics, by neoclassical economics.
Again, sir.
The
Again.
critique of production function has been articulated a long, long time ago in Cambridge economics, first by Joan Robinson. So this production function is a myth which researchers use because it is a very simple tool. Again, because and there you see there I would say that well the quality of research has already gone down because there are these tools, and then you have the statistical tools which allow you to publish in numbers. I
Again,
don't
sir,
agree with that.
again, sir, I would like to make my point more clear. Maybe my wordings are not that proper. I want to say how it differs is that The product, suppose if it is coming out of a machine and machines are involved, the products are replicable. Say for example, we can have
You see,
hundreds of,
machine,
just a minute, sir. Sir,
basic
just a minute,
problem
let me
is
complete,
you
sir.
are you
Sir,
are
please let me
assuming that
complete,
the
sir.
machine is without politics. The
Okay, sir.
machine itself is built in a way in order to alienate. The purpose of building a machine is not just to increase productivity. You see, the history, you have to read the history of machines. You have to read the history of Taylorism, Fordism, post-Fordism. You see, you just take the very simple example of the conveyor belt, which is a long lost thing. Uh, what was the conveyor belt built for? Was it built just for efficiency? It was built, no, of course it talked of efficiency, but also it was built for control. So you see, machines, you don't have machines without politics. Machines are built with politics inscribed in them. And the more you take the skill of the worker into the machine, of course the worker will lose joy and work. And the kind of output that you have is a very typical kind of, it's a different kind of output.
Okay, sir. So, no, what I was saying is that the products are replicable in the sense that we can have thousands of Bisleri bottles, but we can't, in case of teachers, say for example, a researcher, as if the knowledge is embodied and the experience is embodied, we can't have that replicable kind of thing. So it differs a little bit. Anyway, moving to my second question, my second question is that, and it is really troubling
No,
me.
I'm not getting the idea. Replicable products and not non-replicable research workers. Is this what you're saying?
Yeah,
No,
researchers are not
what the
replicable
comparison
in the
is?
sense.
A
Yes, sir.
researcher, you can compare with a worker. How can I compare researcher with the product of a machine output?
No, no. Product of a machine outputs labors are involved, and here researchers are involved. But when the
No,
researchers are
the
working,
product of the machine is not the laborer.
I'm
The
not
product of
saying
the
the
machine is the
laborer. I'm
product.
saying that the product is there, and the, like, leave it, sir. We can have this later. But what I'm saying is that suppose there are labors
You
involved,
see,
no
research is
matter their
replicable.
mental
That is what I'm
condition.
saying. When you use
What I'm
these
saying,
concepts like production function and you use the statistical methods,
what I'm saying is that, sir,
you churn out.
if a lab,
I have reviewed tens of articles which use the same methods, and it is you just change the inputs and you get a paper. You see, so it is as much replicable. The research output is as much replicable as the product of a machine. That's my point.
okay. My second question, okay, sir. My second question is that ethics of market. That when ethics of market is entering academics, what happens is that suppose there is ethics of family. When ethics of market enters, it disrupts it disrupts all other ethics. So if it is entering the ethics of academics, so it kind of dominates the other ethics, in my opinion. So why it happens, I don't understand. I was I'm trying to understand it. When market enters anywhere, it dominates the given culture going on in the thing, and the ethics of market dominates the other, like, streams. So if my question you can get.
I don't know what is ethics of market. What do you mean by ethics of market?
By ethics of market, we mean that right now, like in JNU, there was a discussion going on, and it was put in the meeting that we will have some professors from industry without having academic degree. They are having experience of the industry, and they will come and teach, and university can hire them if they want, if the university wants. So while this discussion was going on, as we are doing research and education, so we were like talking about this among our teachers also. We were doing the
It's not a
discussion.
question of
Then,
ethics of market.
yeah,
What you are saying
then
is
we
that
said that when someone is
what you are
coming,
saying,
yeah,
please.
yes, sir, yes, sir.
What you are saying is that salability in industry becomes the determinant of research because the industrialists come and they influence you to do research in a way which is useful. That is tying up research with industrial needs. That is
Yeah.
what you are saying.
When an industry, someone from industry comes, the person comes with the whole setup, and that setup is different from the setup that we have in academics at,
You see,
at present.
I'm saying all this.
Yeah.
Let us make it more concrete, setups, etc. What I'm saying is that when an industrialist comes, he teaches you he how to do research, what kind of research he is interested in. That is basically he teaches people to do research which is suitable for the industry. That is what happens,
Yes, sir.
right?
Yes, sir.
Uh,
And also,
so
sir,
you
the way we do it, the frequency at which do it, it needs to be increased. Because right now, what they
The
claim is that
frequency
we
needs to be
waste.
increased. That is quite irrespective of whether industrial people come and teach you or not. The frequency of research has to increase. That is the UGC's requirement. That has got nothing to do with industrial people coming and teaching you. You're confusing issues.
No,
You
sir.
see, frequency of research, that is for both people who are teaching and both people who are researching. That has to be increased because of the requirements of the UGC, not because industrialists are coming to teach you. Because industrialists are coming to teach you, it is becoming, say, JNU will become like, say, institutes like Pune Vocal Institute or whatever, like where people basically from Saturdays and Sundays come from industries and teach, and then you get jobs in those industries. So that is, of course, in the long run, of course, they will not. You will not have human sciences. These people will finance, and so naturally, human sciences will die out because there's no point in teaching, say, languages or history. Economics can be taught in a particular way, like it is now. People are doing research in the same way they can be. Of course, that will impact. Of
Okay,
course, that
sir.
will.
I have one more question regarding like Marxism.
I think you should you should allow others.
Okay, sir, no problem. As if no one asked, then I ask. So I'm ready. If anyone is having question, they can ask. But if no one is having question,
Is
I have
anyone
like
asking?
yeah.
Yes, go on.
So
Go on.
sir, in CITD, when I was CITD, I am mentioning CITD because it is a center where
What is
the
CITD?
Center for International Trade and Development in Union. So there are two economic center. One is CSP, the other is CITD. So the,
Yeah.
yeah. So
What is the
in
question?
CITD, what the market-oriented professor, one was market-oriented professor. He taught us like political economy, and there was criticism of Marxism. So in there, what they taught actually was like in Marxism there is economic determinism. Like we say overdetermination, but what how they interpret it is that in Marxism there is economic determinism, and there is economic determinism which decides the all the other aspects of the society.
So, what is the question? What is the question?
So if economic determinism is embedded, then we are coming to overdetermination. How these two are like coinciding? Like how can we reconcile that concept?
I think you have not heard the previous lecture, you see. Because dialectical materialism, of course, that is economic determinism. That is a very popular interpretation of Marxism. And in fact, that is the interpretation of Marxism which many Marxist communist parties still abide by. And dialecticalism is economic determinism. It subscribes to a certain kind of to a base superstructure metaphor where the economics is the base and the rest is superstructure, culture, etc. Everything, religion, everything is determined by the base. So, in that sense, what that gentleman was teaching was not wrong. He was referring to a particular interpretation of Marxism. That is not the interpretation of Marxism that we are discussing here.
So now what we are discussing, like we have Keynesian and then neo Keynesian, we can have like neo Marxism in the future.
Now that is a. I don't think that is relevant here.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes, if there are no further questions, we'll end the discussion here with a thank you to Sadin for hosting this, and thanks to all for listening in.